Welcome to the Breakfast Leadership Show, where we interview global thought leaders on business, leadership, and life. Here's your host, keynote speaker, best-selling author, and chief burnout officer of the Breakfast Leadership Network, Michael Levitt.
Welcome back. I've got Kevin McCarthy on the line. Kevin, how are you?
I'm doing well, Michael. Thanks for having me on board today.
I am awesome. Really looking forward to this conversation because it's really, really important because a lot of organizations are struggling with a lot of things and in this arena in particular. So why don't you share a little bit about you and then we'll jump into the conversation.
You bet. Now, I would say the best way to describe me as a serial entrepreneur, but I've been a keynote speaker and a corporate trainer, leadership development trainer for a couple decades now, actually. Started speaking professionally back in the mid 90s. And so now I am the owner of a couple different businesses, one of which is the speaking training business. The other one is an assessment business. I developed a personality assessment called the Blind Spot Assessment in 2016 is when we launched it, and it's gone viral. I've got coaches now around the world, just onboarded a coach in Australia. So between those two different businesses, I keep pretty busy.
Oh, congratulations on launching. It's difficult enough to run one business. When you're running a couple, it's like you basically have to lean on your team, but also, have some systems in place that help you navigate all of those things and be able to address them, especially when the businesses can be a little different. If they're the same, it's like, okay, we can, basically use a lot of principles. But quite frankly, when doesn't matter if you're, running a nonprofit or a for-profit company and do different things, the systems, a lot of them can mirror each other and have some things. So again, congratulations on that. So let's dive in a little bit on, the blind spots. And you've obviously, you know, got all kinds of work and experience and all of that stuff and your own personal experience with blind spots and in your career. It seems to be one of those things where I think a lot of, leaders, whether they're, at the top of the chart or, middle management, there's a lot of blind spots. And I find in many situations, eh, it's not that they can't see it, they don't even know necessarily where to look for them. And those are the ones that can really, surprise you and cause a lot of problems. So, give us a little background on your work with this and most importantly, what are some of the things that you're seeing, especially with middle management, the challenges that they're facing, especially over the last few years for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Let me give you a little backdrop that leads to your specific comment about management today. Uh, a couple decades ago, maybe 3 decades ago, I was young and arrogant enough to think I didn't have blind spots. Imagine that. And we all have blind spots. That's what I've learned in this progression. I was fortunate and blessed to own several businesses in my youth, and ended up selling one of the businesses to a publicly held company. And shortly, that was during the craziness of the dot-com era, and so it was rather fun, and I did well. But the next opportunity I took was to be a consultant for a startup company. I say startup, should have been really more like early stage, because it was a 5-6 year old company that was getting ready to go public and franchise out all over the country. So it looked like a great opportunity. And because of the context of my mindset at the time, this young, arrogant, top executive, having succeeded and sold businesses, I didn't see the blind spots with this opportunity. What happened is I took this opportunity to become a consultant for 30 days. That turned into a 15-month consulting arrangement where I literally was working pretty much full time in the organization. And suddenly I have the FBI knocking on my door. I had no idea that my boss was committing the largest fraud in the history of the state of Washington. And I was, what my attorney later called me as an unwitting accomplice. I spent 33 months in a federal prison for a crime I didn't knowingly commit. So, Michael, that's where the blind spot journey began, as you can only imagine.
Yeah, okay, I am sitting here, I am incarcerated for something that I, quite frankly, you know, I what did I do that forced me into this situation? And, that's, and, obviously not going into the courtroom details and the testimonies and all that kind of good stuff because, it just at face value, I look at that and a part of me goes, okay, the parties that be, were more like, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth and I don't want to be on the radar of anybody either, but sometimes those situations, there's this sense where it's like, well, we've got to get somebody. We can't just get this CEO. There was other people involved. We got to go after them too, because, the taxpayers deserve this kind of thing instead of actually looking at the case and what actually transpired and all that. But still, it's got to be one of those things where you're like, okay, 33 months is a pretty lengthy time to be, incarcerated for, something that you knowingly really didn't do. And it's a wake up call. And I think that's why it's so important for people to understand, you know, look at things. And if something seems, and of course, with that level of fraud, my hunch is, they did a pretty good job for a while of covering things up, but obviously not good enough because they got on the radar of the FBI, and if you get on their radar, that's typically not a good thing. So, uh,
Right.
so you serve your time, you get out, and afterwards, I'm guessing during the time in there, you probably had a myriad of thoughts and emotions of what had transpired and what you were going to do once you get out and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So a little bit more context, and just make sure we're really clear here. I didn't know my boss was committing a crime, but I still was guilty. I was an unwitting accomplice. I did what I did. There is a smoking gun. All of the details, which we won't go into today, but all the details of the story are in my best-selling book, Blind Spots: Why Good People Make Bad Choices. So no holds barred. You can get all the dirt, if you will, in the book. But to your point, is at the time, and again in context, I didn't realize what was really going on, and I had convinced myself, even against seeing red flags, that everything was fine. I rationalized, I justified things we all do in different circumstances based on how well we want to make ourselves feel about the decisions we just made, right? But that was the impetus, if you will, that yes, landing in prison made me ask a lot of very insightful questions that honestly I didn't have time to even think about as a busy executive, such as who am I? How did I possibly not know what was going on? I consider myself a little bit smarter than the average bear, but at the same time, this is not about intelligence. This is about unconscious biases. It's about thinking errors, right? It's all the thoughts and the framework that goes into making good decisions. And though I thought I was a good decision maker at the time, I realized in hindsight that I had a lot of blind spots. And so that began the journey of this, studying the cognitive psychology and trying to understand what makes our minds tick. Why is it we think we're doing a good job when others are perceiving us as doing something other than a good job? And that's the problem. Now, to bring it fast forward to your point on middle management or management in general, if you think about it, Michael, most managers, most people get put into supervisory management level roles were first subject matter experts or very successful individual contributors. And so leadership looked and said, hey, this is a great opportunity to promote this person into management. And they're great at their job. But what happens is we tend to neglect, we being organizations globally, we tend to neglect training that level of leader into what it takes to actually be a people leader, to how to think clearly, to how to understand and intuitively build relationships, and how to work with people who are very different than that person, right? So we bring, as managers, we bring a lot of our own personal baggage, and all the way up the line. I mean, you and I both know, senior citizens, if you will, who still carry a lot of baggage around, haven't learned how to deal with their baggage, and that's just human, part of the human condition. But as managers, it's so important we recognize that I might be really great at my job, but I really need to learn how to lead people effectively.
And that's what's important. And even with, you had mentioned, the baby boomers, the number of generations that are in the workforce now. So you're, middle manager or all the way up to the executive, you're dealing with all kinds of different backgrounds, experiences. We're, a global planet. So there's a very good chance that your teams are going to be made of people that may have been born outside of the United States. So you've got the dynamics of that, and you throw all of that in the mix. And, as you said, you're a subject matter expert. You're really, really good at what you're doing, and you're leading a team that does that. But how are your people skills? How are you able to understand and communicate with people and seeing things from their perspective. And we see it all the time where managers are seeing one thing and their, the team that reports to them sees something else. And if there isn't a pathway to hammer out the differences and bring awareness to it, that again, that can create blind spots, every day. You have your existing blind spots, but depending on how your team operates, you could be creating new blind spots, every day or every week. And that can really cause havoc for organizations. And, we see it in the stats, the number of businesses that close up year after year just continues to increase. And sure, maybe consumer sentiment and, people aren't buying as much. That's a component of it, but in many cases, it's just that, the management isn't keeping in tune with their people. They're not retaining them, or there's constant turnover. So there's this churn of new people coming in, knowledge loss, and all of a sudden, the products and service you offer start to decline, and your customers notice that really fast, and then they decide to go somewhere else. And then next you know, you're going, how do we do with all this? Looks like we're either going to get acquired or we're going to have to shut things down. And we hear about that all the time, and it's preventable in most cases, just by solidifying what your leaders can do, getting them the necessary training. And obviously, the work that you do is critically important, because if you don't know about your blind spots, you don't want to have happen what happened to you, a very extreme situation. But there are other situations too that could cost, businesses their livelihood for sure.
So true. So true.
So going forward, in the work that you do on this, what are some, I don't want to say is there common blind spots, because I'm sure there's some similarities in the work that you've done, but do you see some commonalities with how people approach things? And I know again, with kind of a narrowed focus a little bit on the middle management, because they're kind of the center of things. They're reporting up and getting direction from above, but they're also navigating their teams to deliver what they need. Is there some common things you see time and time again with the organizations you talk with?
There's a number of common blind spots, if you will. And that's sort of one of the main reasons that I developed the blind spot assessment many years ago, almost a decade ago now, and then released in 2016, is as I was sharing with audiences and workshops with corporate training groups, I needed a way to demonstrate what these blind spots look like in our interaction with one another. And so I developed this assessment. It's basically showing 8 different styles of communication: the competitor style, the motivator style, the peacemaker, the analyzer, and then there's 4 other blended styles, if you will. And so let's take that for an example. Is let's say you're a competitor leader. It doesn't matter whether you're the executive or whether you're brand new into leadership, but your temperament is that competitor. Describing a competitor would be the type A driver: get them done, bullet places, punchlines, quick. I got places to be, people to see. I'm going to drive fast, drive forward, and move us towards success. That's the competitor mindset, if you will, the temperament. And if you're working with a peacemaker, peacemakers that more steady, even keeled, people oriented, teamwork oriented type person that are really good at what they do, but they're slower paced than the competitor. They're more even paced, if you will, and they like more of the details, and they like a little bit more guidance. They don't want just bullet points and punchlines. So what happens when a competitor goes in speaking with a peacemaker and says, "Here's the projects at hand, and here's what we need, and here's the deadlines." Oftentimes, the communication is the way the competitor likes it. It's fast, it's bullet pointed, it's here's the deadlines, I'm moving on. You got it? And the whole time, the peacemaker's communication style is slow down, help me understand each point as we go through. And I'm not sure if I can meet those deadlines you're imposing on me. Let's talk about it. How important are they? Okay, I can meet that, or I can't meet that. In other words, they want to have a collaborative conversation, not just be quote unquote barked at, if you will. And so when you have these two different, very opposite communication styles, and you're not aware, you're not paying attention. These are the real keywords that we talk about. If you're not paying attention as a competitor to your temperament, and then understanding the temperament of the other person you're trying to communicate with, you're simply not going to communicate effectively, because they're not going to receive the information that you want to get across in a way that is meaningful to them. And that's really the key. And the difference between this is what I call the perception gap. So we tend to perceive ourselves in a positive light. And I can say, generally speaking, we're all good people with good intentions. Maybe except for the psychopaths and sociopaths. That's a different story. Hopefully those folks don't work in your organization, right? But nonetheless, we're good people with good intentions. And so the competitor, as a good person, has good intentions to get the things done, get the job done, get the tasks, met, and the deadlines met. But the perception of the peacemaker can easily be, what a bully, what a domineering personality. Well, I mean, I can't get a word in edgewise. I mean, he or she doesn't really care about me. I'm just a means to an end. Right. So it's this, I'm a good person, but other people think I'm not, perception gap. And that's where we have to start learning how to bridge that gap. And those are some of the blind spots we're talking about.
It reminds me, and actually, this was a report that was just released earlier today from Gallup. Every year they do an assessment on employee engagement, and that number has been dropping over the years. And the latest report from this morning, I haven't read it, but actually it was on an interview earlier, and the guest had already opened it up and devoured it. But basically, they said that employee engagement is currently, from their studies, is currently at 21%. So that means almost 8 out of 10 employees in organizations are not engaged. They're there, but they're not. And in a situation like you just described, with you have somebody that's direct bullet pointing to you, I need some help on this and flushing out and need some details. And that type A personality doesn't want to spend the time. Usually when they're in there, they're thinking about 16 other things that they're working on right now. So they're there, they go, blah, 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 and they want to just be done with it. Understanding that, okay, you're just going to figure it out. And then when it doesn't get done correctly, they get mad because it wasn't done right. And it's like, well, you didn't give them the information that they needed in order for them to do that right. And what happens in situations like that is there's only so many times that manager is going to go to the well with that upper manager, and finally they're going to go, you know what? I'm not even going to bother meeting with them unless I absolutely have to. I'm going to get their emails. I'm going to do whatever they say. I'll reply back to them, say, this is what I'm hearing. Is this correct? And even if they don't respond back to it, it's like, okay, well, you know what? I'm just going to do it to the best of my ability, knowing that they're going to yell at me, and I'm just going to go, whatever. And what happens then is the products and services that company makes starts to decline. Your customers start to suffer. Your teammates also start to suffer because they're like, this place isn't fun. And all of a sudden they start leaving. And then next thing you know, you've got a big turnover problem, and the leader's like, why is this going on? I can't find good people. You had good people. You treated them like garbage, and they left. So it's, and again, with work that you do on this in blind spots, how have you seen success? Because I know it's not easy. How have you seen success in opening up the eyes of those type A personalities that don't want to spend an extra minute or two to be clear on something? What are some things that you've been able to help them with? Because I know it's a common struggle that a lot of organizations are dealing with.
Yes, great question, Michael. And it brings me back to a comment you made in the beginning of the show is with regard to the two businesses I own. And in fact, they're not really that separate. One, they're separate entities. They have different functions, but there's so much overlap. And why I say that is because the blind spot assessment is the foundational tool that unlocks a lot of the training that you're talking about, a lot of the bridging the gap, right? So when we talk about me or my coaches and trainers doing this training, it's using the blind spot assessment to help leaders understand, whether they're brand new leaders or whether they're seasoned leaders, to help them use a third party instrument to basically understand what those blind spots look like. So it's the blind spot report. It talks about strengths. It shows your potential blind spots. And one point about that is that all of us bring great strengths to our organization, whatever they are. There's no right or wrong temperament. There's no good or bad temperament. We all bring our strengths, but with those strengths generally is an equally opposite potential blind spot. For example, that competitor again. The common blind spot, if you will, with a competitor is what we call bulldozing. So their strength is get her done, but that get her done can be perceived as and can cause problems because with this idea that they become bulldozers. They just get her done at the cost of, doesn't matter what the relationships are, doesn't matter what people think. And so then they leave a wake of hurt people in their path as they get the job done. So that creates this, that's one of the things that create this idea of disengagement. And I love the Gallup reports. I just got mine today as well. And I skimmed through it. I didn't devour it like your last guest. But as I skimmed through it, one of the observations I made is that, to your point, is that engagement is decreasing. It's only the second time actually in the last 12 years that it's decreased like this, but now it's down to 21%. It was just at 23%. The about 59% of the organization is disengaged, meaning that most of your people are actually looking for a job at any given point in time. And they're doing what you just described. They're just kind of doing to get by. I'm going to show up, I'm going to do my job, but I'm not going to give you 100% of my energy. I'm going to do my job to the point that at least I get it done. It may not be excellent, right? I may not treat the clients or the customers or even my peers with excellence. I'm just going to be there. The worst part of the whole idea of this engagement or disengagement is that about 18% of the workplace is what's called actively disengaged. I like to think of it this way. They're actively sabotaging your organization. They're literally poisoning the minds of the good people around them. They're bad-mouthing management every chance they get. And it's just a matter of time before you let them go, or they're just going to walk out and take people with them if they can help it, right? So this idea of engagement is really critical, and blind spots are a huge interference with the ability to create an engaged, very successful, very flourishing, cohesive workplace, right? The other interesting point that this new report from Gallup brought out is that managers are hugely affected right now by this decrease in engagement. So they're a big part of that decrease. And we talked about earlier the managers who became managers after being subject matter experts or individual contributors, and they need to be trained. They need some people skills training and so forth. But this new report also indicates that because they're also disengaged, there's obviously a problem at the top, as you mentioned, right? And it boils down to, the chief executive team and the senior leadership team. You have to get on board with this idea that we need to not only invest in ourselves, but invest in our people and invest in a way that is building culture, not just training skills. And that's always been a rub over the last, decades. Although it's getting better, more and more organizations, the thriving organizations, are realizing, Michael, that they have to start investing in what has always been considered soft skills, people skills, right? They're realizing that's critical if we're going to really get the job done right.
And those are the organizations that continue to thrive and be agile no matter what's thrown at us, whether it's pandemic, recessions, wars, tariffs, you name it. Those are the organizations that are going to be able to navigate around or through some of these challenging times that we're always in. So, love this conversation. Where can people find out more about you and the assessment and everything else you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to hear from anybody who's interested in more information about this. You can reach me at blindspotassessments.com, blindspotassessments.com. And what I would encourage your audience to do, Michael, is go to the website. There's a couple opportunities. You can actually preview the questions of the blind spot assessment, but book a short demo. Have a conversation directly with me. I'd love to find out more about your organization and how the assessment and possibly the additional training might be of assistance to you. And we have companies that use the assessment for HR, for candidate screening. And we have companies that use it throughout the organization for starting at the top and working their way all the way down. In fact, we recently just onboarded the American Board of Radiology organization, and they're embedding the blind spot assessment into their annual leadership development programs internally. So a lot of really cool things happening. And you can also reach me directly at kevin@blindspots.com. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, definitely all of that in the show notes. And congratulations on getting the Radiology Association involved. The associations are one, I've worked for some in the past. Some are run really well. Some of them are riddled with blind spots. So thrilled to hear, that they've signed on, because I think it's going to make a humongous change in how they run things, which just benefits us all. So again, thank you, Kevin, for being on the show. Really appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Michael. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Breakfast Leadership Show, part of the Breakfast Leadership Network. Visit breakfastleadership.com for tips on empowering your business and your life.